Originally, the advertising billed this one as Star Wars for the 90s. Well, kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit, but there's nothing else quite exactly like it. I love it. It is a cult classic and a film that I just adore watching over and over again. Bruce Willis, Mia Jovovich, Ian Holm, the incomparable Gary Oldman as our villain, 1997's The Fifth Element. One of the most standout things about The Fifth Element is it is a paper-thin plot. We learn about the stones being stored in ancient Egypt at the beginning, the four elements surrounding a fifth element, which is the perfect being, which is life, is the fifth element. That every 5,000 years a dark force comes and this weapon is deployed to defeat it. It's all very black and white spelled out, but with no actual explanation. What is this entity? Why every 5,000 years? Why does the weapon have to be deployed on Earth? Why is Earth its target? Why Egypt? There's a million things that could explain this, but we do not get those explanations. We don't get a ton of explanations. I will not attempt to do a synopsis of this whole plot. By the way, if you haven't seen the movie, you got to see the movie. I suggest seeing it multiple times. Corbin Dallas, former military, elite special forces pilot, knowledgeable on use of all the weapons needed for the mission. Corbin Dallas ends up, because of fate or a higher power, causes Leeloo to crash into his cab, and he is suddenly on a mission to save the world. And there is a priest that has preserved the ancient knowledge about the weapon and the Dark One, Vito Cornelius, and he's on a mission to save the world. There are villains who are in league with Gary Oldman's character, Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, evil capitalist industrialist of the future, who is in league with a force that wants to eliminate all life in the universe without a clear explanation of exactly how he thinks that's going to benefit him. Why it's a big orb, why does it keep growing, why is it headed to Earth, why do the stones get hidden inside a tall blue singing woman, why do you have to meet up on Fhloston Paradise? There's a million things you don't know. It's a paper-thin plot of good versus evil. Gather the pieces of the weapon, get to the temple, and stop the evil. But I love this film, and I think that it works. Here's why The Fifth Element works with a paper-thin plot and no explanation. No explanation is necessarily needed. If we look at this as looking through the looking glass at a bit of the future, and we see this very complete future. I'll explain in a moment. You get a very complete future, and we're getting a glimpse of it, and we're seeing this, and we don't get all the information the same way that looking at events through a keyhole or spying through a satellite across time somehow, you wouldn't get the full explanation. But there's nothing about it that's irrational, if that makes sense. Just because no explanation is given does not mean that there is no explanation. And that is key to appreciating everything that is in The Fifth Element. The technology, the ships, the way that they travel, the things they do, the crazy rebuilding of bodies from basic genetic material, you name it, we're getting a glimpse of this amazing future without an explanation for how they do it, why they do it. We don't know what the federated territory is. Is that just Earth? Though we get the idea there's aliens. We know we fought aliens. A million details are left out because they're not relevant to the plot. But it is a complete future. It's a complete world that we're seeing, because everything from the unusual armor worn by the Mondoshawan, the mystery of what their biological existence is, if any, inside those suits, everything from the way the ships, human ships, look very practical and industrial in space, but then the Mondoshawan ships look like a giant flexing arm of some sort, of just incredibly unique, thought-provoking time, effort, and energy put in to making this world so that even when you see the drive-thru at McDonald's, you are able to spot in the background around the mega city that New York has become a million little things, signs and businesses and indicators. It is well thought out and it is complete. This is not something that's filmed in a warehouse and left to your imagination, even though Corbin Dallas's apartment looks like it's made out of old shipping containers of some sort, and yet in there the unexplained complexity of the gadgetry. So we get this paper-thin plot of good versus evil, collect the weapon, stop the bad guy without explanation, but there's nothing about it that's inconsistent within itself. Well, there's things we don't know. Why are the stones hid in the Blue Woman? Why weren't they hid somewhere else? How did you not do better than this? We don't know. But what we don't know, we don't know. This is not the situation with Disney Star Wars, where suddenly you hop in a TIE fighter and you cross the whole galaxy without a hyperdrive. This is not the fake Paramount new Kurtzman Star Treks, where suddenly the replicator makes all of your food out of your poop, even though that's not how the replicator has worked for centuries, and we knew how the replicator worked. It was not a mystery. So it isn't ever in the Fifth Element inconsistent within its own universe. It doesn't tell you one thing and switch it up. It doesn't tell you something and then stupidly ignore it. Rather, it just gives us all of these incredible visuals, the sounds, the imagined smells, everything to travel from ancient Egypt to a futuristic Earth to deep space to Jamaican guys smoking weed, working on a ship's deck, floating cruise ship hovering over an ocean planet, Floston. Like, why? We don't know. In that sense, it has almost a Blade Runner dystopian future sense, except it is much happier. It's much more colorful. It's much more joyful. It's difficult to even explain. The Fifth Element gives us all the excitement, the adventure. There's romance, and yes, okay, it's like painfully awkward love thing at the end. It makes the weapon work. I mean, if you're a dude, you're like, we built up to this to have, a minute of talking about our feelings in order to get the weapon to fire. But nevertheless, it works for this quirky, unique, one of a kind. I guess that's same as unique, right? It works for the Fifth Element as its own unique Fifth Element verse. This is the way that we're given it, and it's not impossible to follow. It's not that it doesn't make sense. It's just that we don't have enough information in places to make sense of it, except to watch and enjoy it. It's the incredible performances you get. Mia Jovovich, I don't think she was in any major film roles before this. Bruce Willis, of course, this sort of action thing, the dystopian hero. It's very much like the Die Hard movies, where you always feel like he's rolling out of a drunken stupor and lighting up a cigarette, and yet it works, and he carries that particular feel into this film. But a lot of character actors, Ian Holm, Tiny Lister, Sunita Henry, there's a ton of people in it that you recognize that I'm forgetting to mention. Gary Oldman, who is a fabulous actor, plays one of the weirdest villains, and you know that he's doing it on purpose because he's Gary Oldman, who can play brilliantly anything, and he gives us this bizarre figure of Zorg, and it must be intentional, but it's so memorable, and it just stands out. And of course, everyone's favorite character, Ruby Rhod. Chris Tucker, which I kind of imagine him as Ruby Rhod is something that Ice Cube actually saw in the Friday movie after he smoked all that really bad weed or had that bad buzz. Anyway, I love the Fifth Element visually, costume-wise, using the special effects available in '97. It still holds up today with these beautiful sequences in space and hanging over Floston Paradise. To be able to build these industrial ships, design these organic, almost appearing Mondoshuan ships, all the way down to the flying Chinese restaurant that hovers right up to the apartment window. It's just cool. There's so much good stuff in it and an amazing soundtrack. I've heard that they thought about a sequel and didn't do it. I'm always torn about franchises, especially these days. I'd love to see more Fifth Element, but I doubt that anybody could make it nearly as good as it would need to be to measure up. And so maybe we're better off having just that original one to go back and keep enjoying. But it's an amazing movie. I loved it. Let me know what you think.